Daniel Reyes sat at the long, curved table of the Galactic Council chamber, watching the lights shift color as different species spoke. He had sat in this same chair for almost 9 years now. In that time, he had learned that patience was not just a virtue. It was a weapon, if you knew how to use it. The chamber was full today. Delegates from 41 member species filled the rows, their translators humming quietly in the background, turning clicks, hums, and pulses into galactic common. Humanity had one seat at this table like every other species, no matter how big or small their territory was. That had always struck Reyes as strange. A species with 100 worlds had the same vote as a species with one moon colony. It was supposed to be fair. In practice, it meant the loudest and most aggressive species often got their way, while quieter ones got pushed aside. Humans had chosen, since their admission to the council, to be quiet. It had not always been an easy choice. Many people back on Earth, especially in the early years, had argued that humanity should push harder, demand more, take a tougher stance on every issue. But the first generation of human diplomats had decided otherwise. They had seen what happened to species who pushed too hard, too fast. They became targets. Alliances formed against them. Old grudges were given new reasons to surface. So the policy had been simple: cooperate, comply, and never give anyone a reason to call humanity dangerous. For decades it worked. Humanity grew quietly. Colonies spread across nearby star systems, each one keeping a low profile, contributing instead of demanding. Earth's diplomats voted with the majority on small issues, offered humanitarian aid in conflicts among other species, and built a reputation for being predictable and calm. Some species respected this. Many others quietly looked down on it, treating humans the way a strong older sibling might treat a younger one who never fought back. Useful, convenient, beneath notice. Reyes had watched that perception grow for years. Today, he watched the latest piece of it form right in front of him. The Vekarn delegate, a tall insectoid being with a voice like cracking glass, was presenting a new resource directive. The Council recognizes that fair distribution of resources benefits all member species, the translator said in a flat, official tone. Therefore, this proposal requests that all extraction operations within contested boundary zones contribute 12% of output to the Council Equity Fund, retroactive to the start of this cycle. Reyes did not need to check a map to know which contested boundary zones they meant. He had seen the wording change 3 times in committee meetings over the past month, each version narrowing the language just enough that it would apply almost entirely to human mining operations near the edge of Council space. 12% did not sound like much, until you realized it was 12% of nearly every major human extraction colony's output, all at once, with no compensation. The treaty that had brought humanity into the Council, the one signed generations ago, contained a clause protecting member species from exactly this kind of retroactive resource seizure. Reyes had read that clause more times than he could count. He suspected most of the delegates in this room had never read it at all. He raised his hand to speak, not to argue, but to ask a single question. Can the delegate clarify how this directive aligns with Article 4 of the founding treaty, regarding protection of established economic activity from retroactive taxation? There was a pause. The Vekarn delegate's antennae twitched. The Council believes the spirit of cooperation outweighs outdated technical language. Reyes nodded slowly. He did not argue further. He simply made a note, the same way he had made notes after the last 6 directives that quietly chipped away at human interests. He had a private file now, growing thicker every month, filled with these small violations. Each one alone seemed minor. Together, they painted a different picture. After the session ended, Reyes walked through the wide glass corridors of the Council station, looking out at the slow turn of stars beyond the viewports. A Turith ambassador, a broad, four-armed being humanity had worked closely with on trade matters, fell into step beside him. "You did not push back very hard today," the Turith said, his translator carrying a tone of mild curiosity. "It would not have changed the vote," Reyes said simply. "No," the Chirith agreed. "It would not have. Humans are strange. You always seem to know exactly how a vote will go before it happens, and you never fight a battle you cannot win." "We fight the battles that matter," Reyes said. "We just choose carefully which ones those are." The Chirith made a low sound that might have been a laugh. "One day, human, the Council will ask too much. I wonder what will happen then." Reyes did not answer. He already had a guess, but it was not something he planned to share with anyone outside of Earth's closest circle. That night in his private quarters aboard the station, Reyes opened a secure channel back to Earth. The connection took several seconds to establish across the relay network, but when it did, the face that appeared was familiar. Marcus Holt, administrator of the Kessel Deep Mining Colony, one of the largest human resource operations near the contested boundary zones. "You saw the vote," Holt said. "It was not a question." "I saw it," Reyes replied. 12% retroactive." Holt's jaw tightened. "That's not a tax, Daniel. That's theft with better lighting." "I know. How many more of these are we supposed to swallow?" Reyes was quiet for a moment. Outside his window, the stars did not care about council politics. They simply burned the same way they always had, the same way they would long after every species at that table was gone. There was a strange comfort in that. "We've been swallowing a lot for a long time, Marcus," he finally said. "Every time we told ourselves it was the smart move, avoid conflict, build trust, let them underestimate us. And now I think we're close to a point where being underestimated stops being useful," Reyes said. "I think we're close to a point where we need them to understand what they have actually been relying on this whole time, without realizing it." Holt leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "You're talking about the old clause." "I'm talking about reminding the Council that we are members of this Council by choice, not by obligation," Reyes said carefully. "That choice can be reconsidered." There was a long silence on the line. For years, both men had operated under the same quiet philosophy. Humanity gained more by being patient than by being loud. Reyes had built his entire diplomatic career on that idea, but patience without limits was not strength. It was simply submission with better manners. "If we do this," Holt said slowly, "there's no walking it back halfway. They'll either respect us or they'll see it as weakness and push harder." "I know," Reyes said. "That's why we need to be sure before we move." "And are we sure?" Reyes looked again at the thick file of quiet violations sitting on his terminal. Decades of small insults and broken promises that no one outside of Earth's inner circles had ever fully tallied up. He thought about the 12% directive, about the slow erosion of every protection that treaty was supposed to guarantee, about the way species across this council had grown so used to human compliance that they no longer even pretended to ask permission. "I think we've been sure for a while," he said. "We just needed the right moment to admit it to ourselves." Holt exhaled slowly. "Then it's time to start preparing." "Not yet," Reyes said. "Not until they give us something undeniable, something even the slowest species in this council cannot pretend not to see." "And if they do?" Reyes looked out at the stars one more time before answering. "Then we stop asking for fairness," he said quietly, "and we show them exactly what fairness was buying them." The channel closed. Reyes sat alone in the dim light of his quarters for a long time, turning the thought over in his mind. Somewhere out among those stars, the Galactic Council believed it understood humanity completely. Quiet, cooperative, predictable. He almost felt sorry for how wrong they were about to be proven. The emergency vote came faster than anyone expected. 3 weeks after the resource directive passed, a new crisis erupted near the Kessel Deep boundary zone. A Vekarn mining consortium, emboldened by the Council's new resource-sharing rules, moved ships directly into territory that had been recognized as human-controlled space for over 40 years. They did not ask. They did not file a formal claim through proper channels. They simply arrived, deployed extraction drones, and began pulling resources from deposits that Kessel Deep had spent a decade mapping and developing. Marcus Holt received the alert at 2 in the morning, station time. He was at the command deck within minutes, watching sensor data scroll past on the main display. 11 Vekarn extraction vessels, sitting inside what should have been protected human territory, operating as if they had every right to be there. "Get me a channel to their lead vessel," Holt said. It took several minutes for the connection to go through. When the Vekarn captain's face appeared on screen, his expression carried the particular kind of calm that came from believing you held all the advantages. "You are operating in claimed human territory," Holt said, keeping his voice level. "I am requesting immediate withdrawal." This zone was reclassified under the new Council Equity Directive, the Vekarn captain replied. "Extraction here is now permitted under shared resource provisions." "That directive applies to contribution percentages on existing operations," Holt said. "It does not grant new mining rights inside established boundaries." "The Council's legal office has confirmed our interpretation is valid," the captain said. "If you have concerns, file a formal dispute. Until then, we will continue operations." Holt felt something cold settle in his chest. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated test, probably backed by legal opinions specifically crafted to create exactly enough ambiguity to justify the intrusion. Someone in the Vekarn government had decided humanity's pattern of quiet compliance made this an acceptable risk. "I am formally requesting Council intervention," Holt said. "Of course," the captain replied, in a tone that made clear he expected nothing to come of it. The connection closed. Holt immediately opened a channel to Rays. By the time the call connected, dawn was breaking over Kessel Deep's surface, though the colony's interior lighting never changed regardless of the time outside. "They're inside the boundary," Holt said without preamble. 11 ships, active extraction. They're citing the Equity Directive as legal cover." Rays's expression did not change much, but something in his eyes sharpened. "That directive doesn't grant new mining rights. Anyone who actually read it would know that." "They know," Holt said. "That's not the point. The point is testing whether we'll actually do anything about it." "Then we go to the Council," Rays said. "Formally, publicly, we make them rule on this in front of everyone." The emergency session was called within 6 hours. Word of an active incursion into human territory spread quickly through diplomatic channels, drawing far more attention than either men expected. By the time Rays stood to present Earth's case, the chamber was fuller than it had been in years. He laid out the facts plainly. The established boundary lines, the original mapping surveys recognized by the Council decades earlier, the language of the Equity Directive itself, which referred only to existing operations. He did not raise his voice. He did not appeal to emotion. He simply presented the treaty text, side by side with the Vekarn legal justification, and let the contradiction speak for itself. It should have been an easy case. The law was clear, but when the vote came, it did not go the way Rays expected. Several delegates who normally supported human interests abstained. A few outright voted in favor of allowing the Vekarn operation to continue, citing evolving interpretations of shared resource law and the importance of flexibility in a changing galaxy. The final tally was close, but it favored the Vekarn position. Humanity's claim was denied. A murmur ran through the chamber. Even some delegates who had voted against humanity looked uncomfortable with the result, as though they had expected the vote to go differently and were unsure how to react now that it had not. Rays remained still in his seat for a long moment after the results were announced. Around him, the council moved on to other business almost immediately, as if nothing significant had happened, as if the formal seizure of established human territory was simply another administrative matter to be filed and forgotten. He looked across the chamber and caught the eye of the Cherith ambassador, the same one who had walked with him weeks earlier. The Cherith's expression was unreadable, but he gave the smallest shake of his head, almost like a warning. That evening, Reyes sat alone in his quarters, the council's official ruling displayed on his terminal. He read it 3 times, each time with the same calm, careful attention he gave to everything. There was no anger in his expression, not the kind that showed on the surface. What he felt was quieter than anger. It was clarity. For years, humanity's strategy had been built on a simple bet. If they avoided conflict and proved their value through reliability, the Council would eventually respect that value enough to protect their interests when it mattered. This ruling proved that bet wrong. The Council did not see human patience as something to be protected. They saw it as a resource to be spent, the same way they spent everything else. He opened a channel to Holt. "You saw the vote," Holt said immediately. "I saw it," Reyes replied. "They just stole Kessel Deep's eastern fields in front of the entire council and called it fair." "Yes. So what now?" Reyes was quiet for a moment, looking at the stars outside his window the way he had so many times before. This time, though, the silence felt different, less like patience, more like the final calculation before a decision that could not be undone. "Now," he said slowly, "we remind them that membership in this council was always a choice." Holt's expression shifted, understanding settling in. "You're talking about Article 12. "I am. That clause hasn't been invoked in over 100 years. Most of them probably don't even remember it exists." "That's exactly why it will work," Reyes said. "They've spent so long assuming we would never use it that they forgot it was ever there." "If we do this," Holt said carefully, "there's no taking it back. Not easily, maybe not at all." "I know. Are you sure this is the moment?" Reyes thought about the seized fields, about the years of small violations stacking quietly on top of each other, about the calm, almost bored way the council had moved on after stripping away territory that belonged, by every legal definition, to humanity. He thought about how easily they had done it, and how little it seemed to cost them in their own minds. "I think this is the moment they finally showed us, without any doubt, exactly how little our patience was worth to them," he said. "So now we show them exactly how much it was worth to everyone else." He began drafting the message that night. Not a protest, not a complaint. A formal notice, citing Article 12 of the founding treaty, the right of any member species to withdraw from the Galactic Council with 30 days written notice, no justification required. By morning, it was ready to send. The notice went out exactly at the start of the Council's official business cycle, delivered simultaneously to every member species through the same formal channels used for treaty amendments and trade agreements. There was no press conference, no dramatic announcement, just a short, precisely worded document filed through the proper administrative process, the same way humanity had filed every minor report and compliance update for decades. Notice of withdrawal. Per Article 12 of the founding treaty of the Galactic Council, the human delegation hereby provides formal notice of intent to withdraw from Council membership, effective 30 standard days from this filing. All trade agreements, defense arrangements, and cooperative programs currently maintained between humanity and Council member species will be reviewed for orderly termination during this period. It was signed by Daniel Reyes, on behalf of the human government. For the first several hours, almost nothing happened. The notice sat in administrative queues alongside routine paperwork, processed by junior clerks who had no particular reason to flag it as unusual. It was, after all, simply a formal filing under an existing treaty clause. Nothing about the document itself demanded urgent attention. It was nearly a full day before someone senior enough to understand the implications actually read it carefully. The reaction when it came was immediate and chaotic. Reyes was in his quarters when the first call came through, from a junior council administrator he barely knew, asking in a confused, slightly panicked tone whether the filing was some kind of clerical error. Reyes confirmed calmly that it was not. Within the hour, his communication channel was overwhelmed with requests, first from mid-level officials, then from full ambassadors, then finally from the council's senior leadership itself. He answered each call with the same calm, measured tone. Yes, the notice was genuine. Yes, it had been filed correctly under the proper article with the proper waiting period. No, there was no error to correct. No, he was not authorized to discuss humanity's reasoning beyond what was already public record, which, of course, included the recent ruling on the Kessel Deep boundary dispute, the Resource Equity Directive, and the long pattern of treaty interpretations that had increasingly disadvantaged human interests. He let them draw their own conclusions. By the second day, the story had spread far beyond official channels. News networks across dozens of species began reporting on the unprecedented filing. Analysts who specialized in council politics scrambled to explain what exactly this meant. Most of them had never seriously considered the possibility of a founding member species voluntarily leaving. The council had expanded steadily for generations. No one withdrew. The benefits of membership, trade access, diplomatic protection, shared infrastructure, were simply too valuable to walk away from. That assumption was exactly what made humanity's notice so unsettling. If humans were willing to give all of that up, something fundamental had shifted. Marcus Holt watched the reaction unfold from Kessel Deep with a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. "They're starting to panic," he told Reyes during one of their nightly calls. "I'm seeing requests for emergency session after emergency session." "Let them panic," Reyes said. "Panic makes people honest." The Vekarn delegation issued a statement calling the withdrawal an overreaction. "Of course they did. They're the ones who triggered it." "Some of the smaller species are getting nervous," Holt continued. "I've already had 2 separate contacts reach out informally, asking what this means for trade agreements that go through human shipping lanes." Reyes allowed himself the smallest, faintest smile. Now we're getting somewhere. For decades, humanity had quietly built itself into the connective tissue of council infrastructure, without ever drawing attention to how deep that integration ran. Human shipping lanes connected dozens of trade routes that smaller species depended on. Human medical technology, shared freely under cooperative health agreements, supported emergency response systems across multiple sectors. Human peacekeeping forces, deployed under council mandate, quietly diffused border disputes between rival species that might otherwise have escalated into open conflict. None of it had ever been advertised as leverage. It had simply been humanity doing what it did, being useful, being reliable, building trust through consistent contribution rather than demands. But trust built that way created dependency, whether anyone called it that or not. And dependency, once threatened, revealed itself very quickly. On the 5th day after the filing, the council's senior leadership requested a formal meeting with the human delegation, the first such request in years. Reyes agreed to attend, though he made clear through his response that he had no new information to offer beyond what the official notice already stated. The meeting took place in a smaller, more private chamber than the main council hall. Representatives from the most powerful member species sat around the table, their expressions a careful mixture of diplomatic composure and poorly hidden concern. "Ambassador Reyes," the presiding Turith delegate began, "we would like to better understand the reasoning behind this withdrawal notice." "The reasoning is in the public record," Reyes replied evenly. "The Kessel Deep ruling, the Resource Equity Directive, and the broader pattern of treaty interpretation over recent years." Surely these are matters that could be resolved through proper diplomatic channels, rather than withdrawal. We attempted that, Reyes said. Repeatedly. The result was the loss of legally established human territory, approved by majority vote, in direct contradiction to treaty protections that have existed since this council's founding. A Drenari delegate, representing one of the more neutral species, leaned forward. What would humanity require to reconsider this notice? Reyes had anticipated this question many times in the days leading up to this meeting, turning it over carefully in private conversations with Holt and with Earth's senior leadership. The answer he gave now was the one they had settled on together, deliberately simple, deliberately measured. Respect for existing treaty protections, he said. Not preferential treatment, not special status. Simply the same protections every member species is entitled to, applied consistently, rather than reinterpreted whenever convenient. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. That seems like a reasonable request, the Drenari delegate said slowly. It is, Reyes agreed. It has also been our request in various forms for several years now. The difference is that this time, we are prepared to leave if it continues to be ignored. The Vekarn delegate, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. This withdrawal would harm humanity as much as it harms the Council. Your trade access, your diplomatic protections, your economic growth, all of it depends on Council membership. It does, Reyes said simply. We are aware of the cost. We have decided it is worth paying if the alternative is continuing to operate under agreements that exist on paper but are not honored in practice. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward or gesture for emphasis. He simply stated the position as a fact, the same calm tone he had used in 100 council sessions over the years, and let the weight of it settle into the room on its own. The meeting ended without resolution. The 30-day clock continued to count down. By the 20th day, the cracks had become impossible to ignore. A long-standing border dispute between two minor species, one that human peacekeeping forces had quietly managed for almost 6 years, erupted into open skirmishes within 72 hours of the human mediators withdrawing in preparation for departure. Without the steady, neutral presence that had kept both sides talking instead of fighting, old grievances resurfaced almost immediately. Shipping delays rippled across multiple trade sectors as human logistics coordinators, who had spent years optimizing routes through dangerous, pirate-infested regions, stopped offering security escorts. Smaller trading vessels, accustomed to traveling those lanes safely under human protection, found themselves suddenly vulnerable. Several were attacked within the first 2 weeks. Insurance costs across the sector spiked overnight. A medical crisis on a remote Drenari colony, the kind of situation that would normally have been resolved quickly through the shared health response network humanity had helped build and maintain, dragged on for days longer than necessary, as coordination broke down without human logistical support, filling the gaps other species had grown used to relying on. None of it was catastrophic on its own, but together, it painted a picture that grew clearer with every passing day. Humanity had not simply been one polite, cooperative member among many. It had been quietly holding together dozens of small systems that kept the wider council functioning smoothly, doing so without fanfare, without demanding credit, and without anyone outside their own government fully realizing how much weight they carried. Marcus Holt began receiving informal contacts almost daily now, delegates from smaller species reaching out privately, careful not to be seen doing so openly, asking what it would take for humanity to reconsider. They're starting to understand, Holt told Reyes during one of their calls. Some of them, Reyes said. The big players are still holding out, hoping we blink first. Do you think we will? Reyes considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things. No, he said finally. I don't think we will. I think, For the first time in a long time, we actually understand our own value clearly enough not to negotiate it away out of fear. On the 25th day, the Vekarn government, facing growing pressure from smaller allied species whose economies were suffering under the disruption, quietly reversed its position on the original boundary dispute, publicly acknowledging that the equity directive had been misapplied to Kessel Deep's territory. It was a small concession, offered late, clearly more about damage control than genuine reflection. But it was a crack in the wall that had not existed 3 weeks earlier. Reyes accepted the reversal calmly, without celebration. "It's a start," he told Holt, "but it's not enough on its own. One reversed ruling doesn't fix a pattern." "What would?" "A real conversation," Reyes said. "Not a panicked one forced by deadlines. One built on actual respect, not desperation." That conversation came sooner than either man expected. On the 28th day, with only 72 hours remaining before the withdrawal would take effect, the Galactic Council called an emergency full session, the largest gathering of delegates Reyes had seen in his 9 years of service. Every member species sent representation. The chamber, usually filled with the low hum of routine business, carried a different energy entirely, tense, uncertain, charged with the kind of attention usually reserved for moments everyone understood would be remembered. Reyes took his seat at the human delegation's place, Marcus Holt joining him for the first time in person, having traveled from Kessel Deep specifically for this session. Neither man spoke much beforehand. There was nothing left to plan. The position had been clear for weeks. Now it was simply a matter of seeing whether the council had finally understood it. The presiding Turith ambassador rose to address the chamber, his expression carrying a gravity Reyes had not seen from him before. "Representatives," he began, "we are gathered today because in 72 hours this council will lose a founding member for the first time in its history. Over the past month, we have seen clearly and painfully exactly what that loss would mean, not in abstract terms but in broken trade routes, failed peacekeeping and disrupted lives across multiple species. We owe it to ourselves and to the species we represent to be honest about what has happened." He turned, somewhat reluctantly, toward the human delegation. For decades, this council treated human cooperation as a given, a quiet, reliable resource to be used without much thought to its cost. We mistook patience for weakness. We mistook restraint for a lack of options. We were wrong on both counts. A murmur moved through the chamber, but no one interrupted. This council formally acknowledges that the Resource Equity Directive, as applied to established human territory, violated Article 4 protections. The Turith continued. "We further acknowledge a broader pattern of treaty interpretations that disadvantaged human interests without proper cause. We extend a formal apology, and we request, with full understanding of what we are asking, that humanity reconsider its withdrawal." Reyes rose slowly, letting the chamber settle into silence before he spoke. "The council asks us to reconsider," he said. "Before I answer, I want to be clear about something. We did not file this notice out of anger or as a negotiating tactic, or to gain leverage we did not already have. We filed it because we had reached the end of a long, honest effort to build trust through patience, and that patience had been mistaken, again and again, for something it was not." He paused, looking slowly around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who, weeks ago, would barely have acknowledged him beyond polite formality. "Humanity has never wanted dominance in this council," he continued. "We never asked for special treatment or extra protection beyond what every member species is entitled to. We asked simply for the same respect this council claims to offer everyone. For years, that request was answered with quiet, accumulating violations, each one small enough to dismiss until they were not small anymore." He let that settle before continuing. "We are prepared to remain part of this council," he said. "Not because we fear what comes after withdrawal, though we have seen, like everyone else, the real cost of that fear. We are prepared to remain because we still believe in what this council could be, if it lives up to its own founding principles consistently, for every member, not only when it is convenient. The chamber remained silent, waiting. In addition to the apology offered, Reyes continued, we ask for something more lasting than words. A formal review process with binding authority to ensure treaty protections are applied consistently across all member species, including humanity going forward. Not special status, just real accountability. The Drenari delegate who had spoken to him privately weeks earlier rose from her seat. The Council supports this proposal, she said simply. One by one, other delegates rose in agreement, some with visible reluctance, others with what looked like genuine relief. Even the Vekarn delegation, after a long pause, offered their support, though their expression remained carefully neutral. The formal vote passed by an overwhelming majority. The withdrawal notice was rescinded by mutual agreement, replaced by a binding treaty amendment establishing the very review process Reyes had requested. Afterward, as the chamber slowly emptied, Marcus Holt found Reyes standing quietly near one of the wide viewports overlooking the stars. We did it, Holt said. We didn't do anything dramatic, Reyes replied. We just stopped pretending patience meant we had no limits. Think it'll hold, the new review process, the accountability. Reyes considered the question for a long moment, watching the distant light of stars that had outlasted empires far older and far more powerful than this council would ever be. I think they understand something now that they didn't understand a month ago, he said finally. Not because we told them, because they felt what it was like to lose it. He turned away from the viewport, ready to begin the long work of rebuilding trust on steadier ground than before. That's usually how respect actually starts, he added, not with promises, with consequences.